The white two-story house standing in a Pennsylvania suburb perfectly embodied the American dream. There was a lush green lawn, a white picket fence, and seasonal flowers blooming proudly by the front entrance. When Emily Harrison returned home from the library, she felt the usual deep satisfaction. For the first time in her life, she felt like she had found true peace. "Mom, welcome home." 10-year-old Jacob came running to the front door. With his brown hair all mussed up and a small scrape on his knee, he looked like the typical fifth-grade boy he was. Every time she saw his bright smile, Emily's heart warmed. 5 years ago, when she lost her first husband in a car accident, only this child's smile had sustained her. "How was your day?" Emily asked, stroking her son's head. "It was really fun. Mark bought me a new basketball and we practiced together. He promised that if I improve more, we'll have a mini-game this weekend." Mark appeared from the kitchen, smiling in his apron. He had achieved success in real estate development and had married Emily 3 years ago. Tall with gentle brown eyes, he was the ideal husband. His relationship with Jacob was natural too, treating him with the loving care of a biological father. "Welcome home, honey. Dinner's almost ready." "Tonight it's spaghetti bolognese at Jacob's request," Mark said, giving his wife a light kiss on the cheek and untying his apron strings. "I made your favorite salad too." Emily felt wrapped in happiness. Her marriage to her first husband Tom had been happy too, but that was supported by youthful passion. Her relationship with Mark was filled with more mature, deep stability. He never became emotional and was always calm and considerate. He actively participated in Jacob's school events, helped with homework, and sometimes disciplined him strictly when needed. He was truly the perfect family member. However, lately there was one thing weighing on her mind. It was about her grandmother, Rose Miller. Her grandmother, who had been like a mother figure to Emily, had suddenly passed away from a stroke 2 weeks ago. At 78, it was natural given her age, but Emily had been concerned about her grandmother's condition during the last year after she'd entered the care facility. Grandmother Rose had always been intelligent, always giving Emily sound advice when she was troubled. When Emily lost her first husband, when she worried about raising Jacob, when she hesitated about marrying Mark, her grandmother had always been her support. But after entering the care facility, for some reason, visits became restricted. "The infection control measures have become stricter," Mark had explained, but even during the once-monthly short visits, he always accompanied her. "Because your grandmother's dementia is progressing, we don't want to confuse her," was his reasoning. Emily was busy with her library work and was grateful for Mark's consideration. But thinking back now, there seemed to be something in her grandmother's expression, something like urgency, as if she wanted to say something. 3 months ago, during a rare moment when they were alone, her grandmother had whispered in a small voice, "Emily, don't trust Mark." But immediately after, a nurse came in and the conversation was interrupted. Emily thought it was a symptom of dementia and later consulted with Mark about it. Mark looked sad and said, "It seems your grandmother's condition is progressing. The doctor has warned us about this," showing her a medical diagnosis. While sitting around the dinner table, Emily gazed at Mark's profile. He was carefully listening to Jacob's stories, occasionally making jokes to make him laugh. To doubt such a kind person, it must be because of her grandmother's illness.
Can you imagine making $10,000 a month just from YouTube, all from home? That's exactly what I did with Reddit stories. No face, no voice. Check the link in the description if you're curious.
Emily convinced herself of this. "Oh, honey," Mark suddenly spoke up. "About your grandmother's house, we should probably start the sale process soon. It's not good for security to leave it empty, and it would be painful memories for you too." Emily stopped her chopsticks. "But I haven't even finished sorting through her belongings yet." "Then let's hire a professional estate clearing service. It would be more efficient to leave it to professionals, and you don't need to strain yourself." Mark's voice was gentle, but somehow seemed a bit rushed. "No, I want to sort through them myself." There are so many memories with grandmother packed in there. Mark's expression clouded for a moment, but he quickly showed an understanding smile. Of course. I respect your decision. But if it becomes too much for you alone, I'll help anytime. That night, lying in bed, Emily remembered her grandmother's last words. At the hospital, just before losing consciousness, her grandmother had gripped her hand and tried to say something in a faint voice. But she lost consciousness before the words came out. What had her grandmother been trying to tell her at that moment? Listening to Mark's regular breathing as he slept beside her, Emily decided to go to her grandmother's house with Jacob tomorrow. The next morning, Emily and Jacob headed to their grandmother's house. Mark didn't accompany them, saying he had weekend real estate meetings. In the car, Jacob continued talking excitedly. Mom, I bet Grandma's house has secret rooms or something. I want to explore. Yes, well. But today's purpose is to sort through her belongings, so don't make too much of a mess, Emily smiled as she answered, but complex emotions swirled in her heart. When they arrived at grandmother's house, it was wrapped in silence. The flowers in the garden had grown a bit too much, but they still maintained a beauty that seemed to hold grandmother's love. While opening the front door key, Emily remembered a year ago. Back then, grandmother Rose was still living alone. While she occasionally forgot things, she was basically living independently. But Emily clearly remembered when Mark strongly recommended her entering a care facility for your grandmother's safety. Emily, I'm still fine. I want to spend my final days in this house, her grandmother pleaded tearfully. However, Mark continued his calm explanation. You forgot to turn off the stove last week, didn't you? And you've been forgetting to take your medication more often. It would be too late if something happened. Emily thought Mark's judgment was correct. Indeed, her grandmother had been accumulating small lapses of memory, and living alone seemed to have its limits. But thinking back now, there had been something like deep fear in her grandmother's expression. It wasn't just anxiety about environmental change, but perhaps something more deeply rooted. Mom, look at this picture, Jacob pointed to a photo frame in the living room. There was a photo from Emily's wedding. Next to her holding hands with Mark, her grandmother was smiling. But looking closely, that smile was somehow unnatural, and her eyes weren't smiling. I wonder if Grandma was worried about something even then, Jacob's words made Emily gasp. Children's intuition is sometimes sharper than adults. Thinking back to visits with grandmother after she entered the facility, there were indeed many unnatural things. Visit times were always limited to 1 hour from 2 to 3 p.m., and Mark always accompanied her. The explanations were infection control measures and consideration for dementia patients, but other residents' families seemed to visit more freely. And Emily remembered clearly that last visit 3 months ago. On a Sunday 3 months ago, Mark was unusually delayed by business. Emily visited the facility alone and was alone with her grandmother for the first time in a long while. Her grandmother's demeanor then was completely different from usual. Emily, you finally came alone, her grandmother's voice was urgent. I have something important to tell you. About Mark. Is there some problem? Emily asked lightly. Don't trust him. He approached you calculatedly. I investigated. His previous wife. At that moment, a nurse entered the room. Mrs. Miller, it's time for your medication. Her grandmother suddenly fell silent and only had normal conversation after that. When Mark arrived, her grandmother showed her usual gentle smile. On the way home, when Emily consulted Mark about her grandmother's condition, he answered with a serious expression. Actually, I've been warned by the doctor. Your grandmother's dementia is the type that involves delusional symptoms, and she tends to harbor suspicions particularly toward family members. This is the diagnosis. Mark showed her a medical certificate that indeed stated, mild dementia with paranoid disorder. Emily had no medical expertise, so she had no choice but to believe Mark's explanation. But as for why she would suspect you, my marriage partner, even the doctor doesn't understand the clear reason. However, since such symptoms may progress, he said it would be safer for me to accompany visits. Emily was grateful for Mark's consideration. But now, sitting quietly alone in her grandmother's house thinking about it, she was bothered by the date on that diagnosis. It was dated the day after her grandmother had issued her warning. "Mom, what's this?" Jacob called from upstairs. He was in grandmother's bedroom, opening the drawer of the bedside table. When Emily went up to look, there were large quantities of medication there. Sleeping pills, anti-anxiety medication, and several medications with unfamiliar names. Looking at the prescriptions, they were all prescribed at the hospital where Mark had taken grandmother. Did she really need so many different medications? Emily wondered. Her grandmother had indeed been taking blood pressure medication, but Emily hadn't known she was taking such a variety of drugs. Just then, the front doorbell rang. Going downstairs, she found Mrs. Parker from next door standing there. She was a woman in her 70s who had been a long-time neighbor and friend of grandmother's. "Emily, my condolences." Rose was truly a wonderful person, Mrs. Parker's eyes filled with tears. "Actually, there's something I'd like to talk to you about." While drinking tea in the living room, Mrs. Parker opened her heavy mouth. In the months before Rose entered the facility, she was very worried. She came to my house many times saying, "Emily is being put in danger." Emily was surprised. "Danger? What do you mean?" She said she was investigating Mark. "I want to know what happened to his previous wives." But she wouldn't tell me the details. "However," she said, "I need more solid evidence to tell Emily." Mrs. Parker continued. "Even after entering the facility, she would call me sometimes. But in the last 2 months, I couldn't reach her at all. When I called the facility, they just said, 'Mrs. Miller is in poor health and is refraining from outside contact.'" A chill ran down Emily's spine. Maybe her grandmother hadn't been having delusions due to dementia, but had actually been investigating something. And the reason that investigations suddenly stopped was, "Mrs. Parker, could you tell me more details about what grandmother was investigating?" She was using the library computer to search newspaper articles. She seemed to be looking up obituaries of Mark's previous wives. And she said, "It's too convenient to be coincidence." When Jacob came down from upstairs, Mrs. Parker stood up. "Emily, she was really worried about you and Jacob. If anything strange happens, contact me immediately. Rose's last wish was for your safety." After Mrs. Parker left, Emily was confused. About Mark's previous wives' deaths, he had once briefly mentioned, "My previous wife died of leukemia." She thought it would be rude to ask for more details, so Emily hadn't pursued it further. But if her grandmother's investigation was correct, Mark had a hidden past. And to stop that investigation, Emily shuddered. Surely such a thing couldn't be possible. Mark was kind, considerate, and loved Jacob like his own son. She couldn't imagine him doing anything bad. "Mom, are you okay?" Jacob looked up worriedly. "Yes, I'm fine. Just a little tired." Emily smiled at her son, but anxiety swirled deep in her heart. After Mrs. Parker left, Emily continued sorting through belongings with a heavy heart. Jacob was exploring the house with childlike curiosity, but Emily's mind was in turmoil. Her grandmother's warning, the large quantities of medication, and the neighbor's testimony. Everything was deepening her suspicions about Mark. "Mom, can I go up to the attic? There might be something interesting up there," Jacob called from the upstairs hallway. "Be careful. It's an old house, so be careful not to fall through the floor." Emily worriedly gave permission for her son's exploration. Since childhood, Jacob had been good at finding hidden places and mysterious things. After a while, sounds came from the attic. The sound of moving boxes, and suddenly an "ah." Emily quickly went upstairs. Jacob, are you okay? Mom, look. I found something amazing. In the corner of the attic room, Jacob was holding an old wooden sewing box. The surface was covered with dust, but it had beautiful craftsmanship with careful detailing. This might be great-grandmother's, Emily said as she received the sewing box. It must be a precious memento. Jacob began examining the contents of the box. Old spools of thread, buttons, a pincushion, and faded lace scraps. However, he noticed that the depth of the box didn't match the inside depth. Mom, this box is weird. The bottom is too shallow. Emily also found it strange and examined the box closely. When she pressed lightly on the bottom board, it moved slightly. It had a double bottom. Carefully removing the bottom board, a hidden space appeared. There was a single cassette tape there. It was an old-style tape with a handwritten label. For Emily. Listen alone. Rose. Emily's hands trembled. It was a final message from her grandmother. However, Jacob excitedly called out. Mom, it's a secret message from Grandma. Let's listen to it right away. But it says to listen alone, Emily hesitated. But I'm family too, right? Grandma would want me to hear it too. Right, Mom? Faced with Jacob's pure eyes, Emily couldn't refuse. Remembering there was an old radio cassette player in grandmother's bedroom, the two went downstairs. After dusting it off and plugging it in, it worked. Emily took a deep breath before inserting the cassette tape. When she pressed play, after some static, her familiar grandmother's voice flowed out. Emily, to my beloved daughter. If you're hearing this tape, I'm no longer in this world. There's no time. Don't trust Mark. He approached you calculatedly. Emily gasped. Jacob was also listening intently to the tape with a serious expression. I investigated. His previous wife Susan Harrison died 3 years ago, falling down the stairs at home. But according to her friend, that day Susan had said she was going to discuss divorce with Mark. His wife before that, Mary Harrison, drowned in a boating accident at the lake 5 years ago. She too had substantial life insurance. Emily's blood drained. Mark had said his previous wife died of leukemia. Why had he lied? And the more I investigated, the more I could see a pattern. He approaches wealthy widows, marries them, and then the wives die suspicious deaths. Emily, you're also a target. With your previous husband's life insurance and your family inheritance, you have considerable assets. Her grandmother's voice continued. When I learned this fact, I tried to tell you. But Mark put me in a facility, restricted visits, and tried to cut off contact with you. And the medication. Here grandmother's voice broke off, and coughing sounds could be heard. He's using medication to cloud my consciousness and worsen my dementia symptoms. But now my mind is temporarily clear. Emily, listen. My death probably won't be natural either. Mark has realized I'm gathering evidence. Static entered the tape and an inaudible section continued for a while. Then grandmother's voice could be heard again. Emily, the evidence is in my bank safety deposit box. The number is 1247, your birthday. The key is in this sewing box. Contact Private Investigator Samuel Green. He has all the evidence. The phone number is. At that moment, the sound of the front door opening came. Mark's voice echoed. Emily. Jacob. Are you there? Emily and Jacob froze. The tape was still playing, and grandmother's voice continued. Please, Emily. Protect Jacob. Mark is going to try to kill you next. And after getting all the assets, Jacob too. The sound of footsteps coming up the stairs could be heard. Emily hurriedly tried to stop the tape, but Jacob grabbed her hand. Mom, listen, Jacob's voice was trembling. but his eyes were serious. If what Grandma says is true. Where are you? Mark's voice got closer. Emily quickly took out the tape and hid it in the sewing box. Just as she turned off the radio cassette player, Mark entered the room. There you are. How's the estate clearing going? Mark showed his usual gentle smile. But to Emily, that smile looked terrifying. Well, there are so many mementos, it's going to take time. Emily tried to stay calm. I see. Don't push yourself. By the way, did you find anything interesting? Mark's gaze was directed at the sewing box. Just old sewing supplies, Emily answered on the spot. Jacob looked up at Mark. Usually her son would run to him calling Mark, but today he was keeping his distance, which Mark seemed to find suspicious. Jacob, you're quiet today. Are you tired? Jacob looked at his mother before nodding slightly. I'm a little tired. Mark looked at his watch. It's already evening. Let's call it a day and go home. I'll make dinner. During the car ride home, Emily's head was in chaos. If grandmother's tape was true, then Mark sitting next to her was a serial killer. But she couldn't believe that the gentle husband she'd lived with for 3 years could do such things. Jacob in the back seat was unusually quiet. Looking in the rearview mirror, her son seemed to be deep in thought about something. When they got home, Mark began preparing dinner as usual. Today let's have your favorite grilled salmon, he said while putting on his apron. But while looking at the cooking, a terrifying thought crossed Emily's mind. In grandmother's tape, it said Mark had used medication to cloud grandmother's consciousness. If something was also in her own food. Mom, Jacob called in a small voice. When they were alone, he approached his mother and whispered, I think what Grandma said is true. Mark's eyes were different than usual. Emily couldn't dismiss her son's intuition. Children sometimes sense subtle changes that adults miss. Mom, we have to run away right now, Jacob's voice was urgent. If Mark killed Grandma, he's going to try to kill you next. And me too. Emily gripped her son's hand. She still didn't want to believe it, but Jacob's fear was real. And grandmother's voice came back to her, protect Jacob. I understand, Emily made her decision. But we have to act normally. We can't let Mark notice. However, Mark turned around from the kitchen. You two, what are you discussing? Behind that smile, something cold that she'd never seen before gleamed. Emily felt a chill down her spine. There was no more time. Tonight, something would happen. Grandmother's warning was about to become reality. It's nothing. I'm just tired today, so I thought we'd rest early, Emily pretended to be calm. Yes, it was a hard day. Rest early, and tomorrow I'll help with the estate clearing, Mark said kindly, but it felt like there was some other meaning behind those words. During dinner, Emily and Jacob exchanged glances, making a silent agreement. Tonight, they had to escape. They had to accept grandmother's final warning and protect Jacob's life. After finishing the meal, Emily said, I have a headache, so I'll take medicine and sleep early, and went upstairs. Jacob also said, I have homework, and headed to his room. But actually, both were beginning escape preparations. Grandmother's cassette tape and sewing box, and minimal luggage. The clock pointed to 9 p.m. Before Mark came to the bedroom, they had to leave the house. Emily's heart was beating violently. If grandmother was right, her and Jacob's lives were in danger. If she was wrong, Emily would be doubting her beloved husband and destroying their family. But she couldn't trade her son's life for anything. To fulfill grandmother's final wish, Emily had to make the most difficult decision. After 10 p.m., Emily and Jacob quietly slipped out the back door of the house. Relying on the sound of the TV from Mark's room, they held their breath and headed to the garage. Emily's hands held grandmother's cassette tape and sewing box, and Jacob carried a small backpack. Fearing Mark would notice the sound of starting the car engine, Emily pushed the car to a location a little away from the house. When she finally started the engine, both their hearts were beating violently. "Mom, where are we going?" Jacob asked anxiously from the back seat. "First we'll evacuate to a safe place, then contact the police," Emily answered while driving. But inwardly she was confused. What should she explain to the police? Would they believe Mark was a killer based only on a cassette tape? They arrived at a roadside motel around 11 p.m. It was a small motel called Peachtree Inn, with few guests and seemed unlikely to attract attention. Emily paid for one night in cash and secured a room in the back. Entering the room, Jacob sat heavily on the bed, exhausted and fearful. Emily embraced her son and said, "It's okay, Jacob. Grandma will protect us." "Mom, is Mark really a bad person?" "I liked Mark," tears welled up in Jacob's eyes. Emily felt the same way. She didn't want to believe that the husband she'd loved for 3 years was actually a terrible killer. But she couldn't ignore grandmother's desperate warning. The next morning, Emily called the local police station. However, the responding officer's reaction was different from what she expected. "Ma'am, wait a moment. Your husband Mark Harrison filed a missing person report for you and your child last night. He said, 'My wife has been in shock from her grandmother's recent death and has become mentally unstable.'" Emily was stunned. Mark had already gotten ahead of her. "No, that's wrong. I'm normal. Actually, my husband is the one who—" "Ma'am, could you come to the station first? Your husband is very worried about you." After hanging up, Emily trembled. Mark was trying to make her out to be mentally ill. This too had been predicted in grandmother's tape. At that moment, there was a knock on the room door. Emily tensed, but heard a woman's voice through the door. "Cleaning service." Opening the door slightly, a woman was standing there. However, she wasn't carrying cleaning supplies. "Actually, I'm Private Investigator Sarah Johnson. I'm Samuel Green's assistant. I received a request from Rose Miller." Emily was surprised. It was someone related to the private investigator mentioned in grandmother's tape. "Mr. Green is currently out of state on another investigation, but since this is an emergency, I came. Last night, we received reports of suspicious activity around your home." Sarah entered the room and took out a thick file. "Rose had been requesting investigation from us for 3 months. As a result of detailed investigation into Mark Harrison's past, we discovered terrifying facts. The file contained detailed materials about Mark's previous wives. Susan Harrison, Mary Harrison, and his first wife Linda Harrison. All had died suspicious deaths. Linda died 8 years ago from sleeping pill overdose. It was ruled suicide, but according to her friends, she had been considering divorce. Mary died in a lake boating accident. Susan fell downstairs. All were processed as accidents, but they have common points. Sarah pointed to photographs. All had substantial life insurance policies with Mark as beneficiary. And there were testimonies of marital problems before their deaths. Jacob asked in a trembling voice, "Was my mom almost killed the same way?" "Yes. In fact, Mark increased your mother's life insurance last year. Without her knowledge." Emily turned pale. Indeed, last year Mark had suggested reviewing insurance for future security. She had only signed the documents without checking the details. What's more problematic is that Mark has been investigating your financial situation in detail. Your previous husband's life insurance, family inheritance, and even bank account balances. He approached you systematically. Sarah took out other documents. These are records of Mark contacting other widows. Before marrying you, he had approached at least 5 wealthy women. But you had the best conditions, so he chose you. Emily felt nauseated. 3 years of married life, his love for Jacob, was it all false? How did Grandma die? Jacob asked tearfully. Rose's blood test results showed drugs that normally wouldn't be lethal doses were detected. However, in elderly people, taking small amounts over long periods can strain the heart and potentially induce strokes. Mark isn't a doctor, but in the process of killing his previous wives, he probably learned this method. At that moment, Emily's cell phone rang. It was from Mark. Don't answer it, Sarah stopped her. He might be tracking you through GPS. But the phone kept ringing. When it switched to voicemail, Mark's gentle voice could be heard. Emily, where are you? I'm very worried. I understand you're shocked by your grandmother's death. But don't bear it alone. We're family, aren't we? Jacob is worried too. Come home soon. That voice was exactly the same as always. The voice of a loving, gentle husband. But to Emily now, that gentleness sounded terrifying. Had it been acting, or was it his own way of showing love? He'll gradually become more anxious, Sarah explained. Because his plan is starting to go awry. He probably planned to take action tonight. But the police seem to be on Mark's side. They think I'm mentally unstable. It's okay. We have solid evidence. We're coordinating with an FBI white-collar crime agent. Since there's a possibility of serial murder, investigation has already begun. At that moment, a familiar car stopped in the motel parking lot. Mark's black SUV. He found us, Emily paled. Sarah acted calmly. Let's go out the back. We'll move to a safe place in my car. But Mark was already heading toward the motel entrance. He seemed to be confirming the room number at the reception. There's no time, Sarah opened the window. Let's get out this way. The three climbed out the window and headed toward Sarah's car. But Mark noticed just then. Emily! Mark shouted. That voice contained anger she'd never heard before. Sarah quickly started the engine and drove off. Mark's figure reflected in the rearview mirror was no longer the gentle husband Emily knew. It was cold, calculating, his true face revealed. Now the police will understand the seriousness of the situation too, Sarah said while driving. His actions support your testimony. In the car, Jacob clung to his mother. Mom, are we safe now? Not yet, but it'll be over soon, Emily embraced her son. Grandmother's voice echoed in her heart, protect Jacob. She was determined to fulfill grandmother's final wish. 3 months later, in a small town in Vermont, Emily and Jacob began a new life. Everything changed from the FBI agent interview at the state police headquarters. Mark Harrison was arrested on charges of serial murder and insurance fraud, and confessed to all crimes faced with mountains of evidence. The trial attracted national attention. The prosecution presented detailed evidence about the murders of 4 wives, revealing the full scope of Mark's cold, calculated crimes. He was called the Widowmaker and received a life sentence. When their eyes met in court, Mark showed a truly sad expression for just a moment. But whether that was acting or genuine, Emily could no longer tell. The autopsy results for grandmother Rose were also made public. Drugs detected in her blood had been administered in small amounts over a long period, eventually causing the fatal stroke. Grandmother's death was prosecuted as murder and added to Mark's charges. Emily opened the bank safety deposit box her grandmother had left. Inside were detailed investigation materials and another cassette tape. Emily, if you're hearing this tape, you managed to escape safely. Family isn't just about blood relations. It's bonds tied by trust and love that make true family. Watching you and Jacob, I was convinced of this. Even if I'm gone, your bond is eternal. And remember, the truth will always come to light eventually. Emily cried at grandmother's final message. Grandmother had tried to protect them until the very end. The new house in Vermont was modest compared to the mansion in Pennsylvania, but it had true peace. Emily began working as a librarian at the local library, and Jacob was fitting in at his new school. "Mom, when I grow up I'm going to be a detective," Jacob said one day. "A detective who protects families from bad people. That's wonderful. But now let's focus on your homework," Emily stroked her son's head. After that terrifying experience, Jacob seemed more mature than before. But his childlike smile had returned. Meanwhile, Mark spent lonely days in state prison. Other inmates called him the widow killer, and he was completely isolated. No one came to visit him. His prison memoir was rejected by multiple publishers. The world no longer showed interest in his words. When spring came, Emily and Jacob went to visit grandmother's grave. The headstone was engraved with "A woman who protected her beloved family to the end. Thank you, Grandma, for teaching us the meaning of true family." Emily offered white roses, grandmother's favorite. Jacob also put his small hands together and said, "Thank you, Grandma, for protecting us. I'll work hard to live with just Mom and me." On the way home, Jacob gripped his mother's hand and said, "Mom, we're real family, right?" "Yes. Whether there's blood relation or not, feelings of caring for each other create family." Their shadows in the sunset stretched long, as if watched over by grandmother. The terrifying presence named Mark had completely disappeared from their lives, replaced by a small family bound by true bonds. Emily carefully preserved grandmother's cassette tape. It was both a record of terror and proof of the courage of a woman who risked her life to protect those she loved. Someday, when Jacob grew up, he would understand grandmother's true greatness. True family is not blood relation, but bonds worth protecting with one's life. Emily and Jacob would never forget this truth that Grandmother Rose had taught them at the end. In their new town, walking their new lives, a future full of hope spread before them.